Howdy everyone. I said a little while ago I was going to make a video blog, and this is that video blog. I'm going to talk to you just a little bit about my having known a man named Lloyd Arriola, who passed away sadly a couple weeks ago, a year or two younger than me. We were both freshmen at Peabody Conservatory in 1990, the fall 90, spring 91 semesters, and lived just down the hall from each other in the dorm. We met standing in line for something. Either it was a recital or a registration process at the beginning of the year. It was like probably the second day of school or something, or second day we were there for orientation. I can't even remember, but we just quickly realized that each other were pianists and got along, for the most part, very well. Now, we didn't always agree on some things. We both, though, were rather temperamental souls in our different ways. And he also didn't come from a whole lot of money, from what I understand. And this is the kind of thing, there's some things where it's like, I wasn't that close to him after I was at Peabody. We were friends, but we fought. It was unusual. We fought more than I fought with other friends that I occasionally fought with or whatever. You know what I mean? However, I knew that he knew his stuff, classical music-wise. He knew way more than I did, and I knew a fair bit. He didn't know some of the 20th century music that I knew, but he came to learn that professionally and through graduate school at Juilliard and things like that. I know he did because I don't think he was aware of Michael Tippett's piano concerto, for example, in 1990. He didn't know Tippett's piano solo music or whatever, because I did, and I talked to him and played him parts of things and stuff. And then on Facebook in the last few years, he mentioned having great admiration for Michael Tippett's piano concerto, for example. And I know that he knew what he was doing. He sought to broaden his classical music horizons all the time, obviously, but he had a loyalty to that music and possibly to the cultural implications of it that disturbs me as an ecumenicalist, essentially. Somebody who, I don't want to be a snob, I want to know as many kinds of music and the validities of all those kinds of music as much as I can and put them into practice. As a sideman, especially, if I'm a paid instrumentalist, I need to be conversant with as many styles as possible in order, I think, for me to be as well-rounded a musician as I should be, to say nothing of commercially viable. But Lloyd apparently really didn't want to do that. He did involve himself in the occasional musical theater accompaniment. But anyway, the thing is that we both knew a book called Reflections from the Keyboard, and it was an interview compilation book with about 40 classical pianists, including Vladimir Horowitz and Glenn Gould and Leon Fleischer, who was on the faculty of Peabody and sort of a grand dragon of sorts. That's a terrible phrase to use, given I meant he was like an overlord of sorts, not in any way fascistic, but just such a big star in that world that everyone kind of walked on eggshells, whether he wanted it or not. But I do know he was kind of hard to please, and he was probably very conservative culturally. Probably not very interested in jazz at all, for example. And that would be hard for me to relate to. So somebody like Lloyd, who studied with one of Fleischer's students who was on the faculty, one of his former students, if I'm not mistaken, Johann Kaplinsky. And then my teacher that one year at Peabody was Julian Martin, who also had studied with Leon Fleischer. So, but the point is that Lloyd and I both knew this book. It was given to me for Christmas when I was 12 or 13 years old in like 1983 or 4. It was a pretty brand new book. I had a hard copy of it. Within 3-4 years, it had split apart. I had pored over the contents of that book to such an extent. And within a week or two of my being at Peabody, Lloyd and I realized we each knew that book. And we quoted it like biblical scripture. We would know, for example, that Vladimir Ashkenazi had said that he liked any kind of music as long as it had a message. And David Duvall, who was on the faculty, he was a professor of piano literature at Juilliard. He'd been the interviewer of all these pianists in this book. And he said, well, what about rock music? And Vladimir Ashkenazi says, I think most rock music has no message with very few exceptions. It's there's more to it than that. I really could get into all of that. But the thing is that I wanted to know, what were those exceptions? You know, why do you consider yourself an authority on what good music is, and you won't talk about what the exceptions are in a field that maybe is rife with mediocrity? One could make a case that the classical music world is rife with mediocrity. I think Leon Fleischer himself talked about how much of a glut there was in piano students in America in the 1970s, that it just arose over a 10-year period of time. Like there had been a few hundred piano students in America, and then all of a sudden there were some 20,000 piano students in universities and conservatories by the 1970s. And you know, the thing is, I'm not a content snob if I am one. I have qualms and compunctions. And Lloyd, I think, this is the thing, I don't want to mischaracterize him, because we had arguments, but especially in the last year or two, they were much friendlier. And I'm kind of sorry that when he lived in New York as a graduate student at Juilliard, and I was just a struggling artiste there, that it was really too difficult for me to be friends with anybody from the Peabody world, because I was struggling in a way that I didn't really want to show those folks. Now, I was also trying to find my own authorial voice, if you will, and I think Lloyd didn't compose, to my knowledge. If he did, he would have perhaps been overly self-conscious about it. And again, I just am concerned that I'm not mischaracterizing him, because I have such respect for what he knew. He knew languages and things that didn't interest me. I wasn't interested in opera. I have some appreciation for it now on occasion, but he had a love of Wagner, for example, and I dislike Wagner very much. And it isn't even because of his anti-Semitism or anything like that. It's just because that music strikes me as pompous. That's what it strikes me at. I don't need it particularly. It doesn't satisfy me. In fact, Billy Joel frequently satisfies me more than Wagner, and Billy Joel is no longer one of my absolute favorite musicians, but when I was a kid, because he played piano, it mattered to me, and I don't think it mattered to Lloyd. Now, I was going to speculate as to why that was, but I think he just identified with the authority that classical musicians of a certain echelon carried themselves with. And I want to know why Lloyd was sort of in a beta role, either as a coach or an accompanist, or he did do piano solo playing, and that's not a beta role. But he was, he was an accompanist so long. I find, for my personality, it didn't please me after a while, because I'm not in charge. People can talk all they want about how a classical pianist playing for a classical singer or a classical instrumentalist who's doing a solo is a collaborative artist. But really, in daily rehearsal and making a living at it, kind of a sense, we are paid to do what you tell us to do. And yet, Lloyd, there's a story. Now that he passed away, I want to share this in case nobody else caught this on Facebook. This is the most awesome story. I have such admiration for Lloyd now. I'm just sorry I never got to tell him. But anyway, he apparently was accompanying a woman. She said, I'll never forget it. I'd worked with him the year before. Everything was great. We did a good recital. And then I had some problems with my voice or whatever. And so a year goes by and she's doing an audition, and Lloyd is the audition accompanist. And she's playing for everybody there. And she starts and she's like out of tune or flat and having trouble with her voices, having memory problems with lyrics and things, just falling apart. And Lloyd apparently pounded the keyboard with his fists, slammed the desk down, and said, I can't, what the hell happened to you? I remember last year you could sing. Ah, man, what a badass. That's so awesome. Apparently, then, because this is what happened next. This is what makes it so badass. It's ridiculous. That was awesome in the first place. I can't get away with that. Maybe I'm a larger man than Lloyd was as far as height, and therefore I could be frightening to people in a way maybe that Lloyd couldn't be. But even so, he says, pick a song to this auditioner. And he says, any song. So he knew from the canon of classical music, anything that she was likely to have done that was common, he would know it from ear by memory enough to play it there. I'm not quite that badass at that. I'm good, but I don't have that I didn't immerse myself in that music to the exclusion of all other music. My ecumenicalism means that I've got to go back and practice to get my memory on a lot of stuff. But anyway, it's just that I'm sorry that Lloyd passed away, because he was especially starting to talk to me about trying to understand Giant Steps by John Coltrane. Lloyd was looking to understand music that he realized, in his words, he couldn't wrap his ear around it. But he considered it fine music. So it's interesting that, because I think I had said to him, this is where my memory's fuzzy, and I'm almost loath to go back on Facebook and try and find my correspondence with him, since this was only a couple weeks before he died. And that was, a couple of weeks ago now. Anyway, but I'm pretty sure that I said to him, look, Lloyd, I know you can wrap your head around it. It's just at the sheer speed of the recording, of the playing, the John Coltrane group at the time, on that record, Giant Steps, is just, it's a blizzard tempo. It's too fast for most any humans to deal with, except John Coltrane. His backing group could just hang on for dear life with that. But if you slow the whole composition down, and never mind the improvisational section where John Coltrane is involved with his sort of, flurry of notes, there's something else. There's the key, the key compositional. It's what's called the head in jazz. Prior to a certain era, it's like a 32 bar tune, and then you improvise over that, and this still follows that pattern. But it modulates so many times that it's hard to know what key it's in. But it does hit the B chord, the B major chord, on the first beat of the song, right before the ninth measure of the song, and there's a 5 of 5. So the 2 chord and the 5 chord lead to the 1 at the end of the 16th measure. So that's like, in effect, telling you twice or 3 times that it's in B major, as much as it goes all over the place. But just analyze the activity slowly in that. Like we had in ear training, because he and I were in the same ear training class with Professor Clinton Adams, a fascinating man. Excellent classical pianist. Every bit as knowledgeable, if not more so, about all kinds of obscure classical music as Lloyd or I, by probably some margin at that point, being in his 30s, I suppose, or maybe about 40 years old to our 18 or 19. But Clinton Adams and the graduate student pianist who was his assistant, whose name I can't remember right now, but they both said to me, Bo, it doesn't matter that you didn't have solfege syllables in your training, although we want you to try to do that, try to sing with those syllables, which I hated doing. I would always get screwed up. Lloyd, I think, had been taught fixed do before, so it was hard for him to do movable do, if I'm remembering correctly. But the point is, we both were strong sight singers if we could just sing on la. And they told us how to transcribe in that class, and I'm pretty sure that most university schools of music don't ever have this level of transcriptional exercise that we had at Peabody. And Lloyd and I both were really good at that kind of stuff. And we knew a lot, and we didn't come from money, and it was kind of uncomfortable there in some ways, I would suspect. As different as he and I were, and as much as we would argue, we had certain things in common that made it very difficult for other people to mess with that, if you understand what I mean. Now, there's all kinds of stuff I could talk about. And now that he's passed away, I just don't feel like I should, just because, you know, I got to think about, like, whatever his family is contending with at this time. But I mean, I just wonder, I will say this, I wonder if taking a beta role, what didn't do him some damage that he wasn't even aware of. I had to get away from doing the amount of classical accompanying I was doing because I really just never had enough say. And as a person, let alone as a musician, I feel like I got to have more say or I'm just going to kind of crumble up and die. And the thing is, though, maybe he wanted that role because he said once, I'll finish with this. He said once that the time that he got to play with Zubin Mehta for something, I think it was just a rehearsal, and he was hired to be the accompanist for this kind of private meeting that Zubin Mehta had, if I'm not mistaken. And he just felt so over the moon about that, and he was saying something like, I really can't believe that I had the honor of working with such an artist. And I just felt like, I said to him, Lloyd, you're every bit as talented as Zubin Mehta. He may have more prestige. He may have had more luck. There's a lot going into this. But who says you're any less awesome? Was what I was trying to get across to him. So, people do their lives differently from each other, which is like an incredibly cop-out kind of thing to say maybe. But I just mean... his path was probably just as valid as mine, and it would be stupid of me to say anything that suggests I think otherwise. But, I'm kind of sorry that his type of badassery, as much as it came from a somewhat elitist classical musician's point of view, that his level of badassery was not given what I would like to think of as his proper due in his lifetime. But now that he's passed on, maybe we can do something about that. So, it's been nice to talk with those of you for Peabody that talked with me afterwards. Most of you are the same people I've still been talking with for the last 10 years on Facebook or whatever. A flood of memories has come back to me as a result of this. And, I'd be curious. It was a good year, that year I was there. But a lot of bullshit, too. Just a whole lot of bullshit. So, Lloyd knew what most of that bullshit was. I think we just had different philosophies about a lot of things. But he knew his stuff. And people need to know that he knew his stuff. Okay. Peace out.